After filming a gazillion interviews in my career, somewhere along the line it hit me that all of my favorite interview lighting setups had one thing in common. And all of the shots that I thought were properly exposed but still didn't really hit the mark were all making the same mistake. Welcome to Sounded Up Films. My name is Eric. I'm a cinematographer based out of Boston. Now, that mistake I was making was having everything live in the midtones. And the common thread in all of my favorite lighting setups was having contrast. And I do not mean jacking up a contrast slider in post. I mean composing your shots to have both prominent dark and light areas of a frame. And you might assume that's just like a naturally occurring thing in this universe that we all film in, but it's typically something you actively have to work towards. And the best case scenario for this, which I always have my eye out for when I'm setting up an interview, is a natural highlight and deep shadows, which are represented as purple and blue on false color, which is a tool that I highly recommend using for this technique. I mean, sure, you can always just nail exposure on the subject's skin tone, but if everything else in the frame is within 20 or 30 IRE on either end of that skin tone, the shot will look boring and unprofessional. Those shots that always look next level have either some yellow or red pushing towards the higher end of the waveform and some blue and purple pushing towards the bottom. When I first started playing around with false color on my C70, it was really just to make sure that not too much was clipping and going into red, and on occasion to check if a backdrop or green screen was evenly lit. But the more I use it, the more I realize that all of my shots that are properly exposed, but just don't really look that great, had no purple or blue, or just very little of it. They lacked the shadows for adequate contrast and therefore were very tonal. So how I use false color has changed. When I made my C-Log 2 exposure deep dive last year, I voiced some reasons why I preferred zebras to false color for nailing skin tones. Basically, it's tough to tell from a glance if something is darker than middle gray or brighter than middle gray because there's gray all over the waveform and both shades of gray look very similar on the C70's false color. And while that is still true, it's really just a matter of getting used to that versus not using false color because of that. All of my tests in that C-Log 2 video were done with extremely flat lighting, and I think that's why I found it particularly challenging working with false color, because a small increment in exposure will bring you from below middle gray, represented as gray, to above middle gray, still represented as gray, just a slightly different shade. But in real interview scenarios that you're lighting that have some type of contrast ratio on the person's face between the lighter and darker side, it is actually extremely easy to quickly get the right ballpark with false color. Because all you really have to do is just put pink on the brighter part of your subject's face, and you're good. There is no one proper exposure. It comes down to what you want the shot as a cinematographer to look like and to feel like. But if you do want to start that decision-making process from a technical standpoint, just get that pink and you're good. As long as that pink is the only pink, and you do not have large amounts covering the majority of frame, because proper IRE skin tones aren't really your biggest problem if there's no contrast. This issue is particularly front of mind for me right now because I am editing a documentary that I shot probably 2 or 3 dozen interviews for, and not changing any lighting in the environment because I wasn't able to. But based off the factors that were in my control, like where I stood, what direction I pointed the camera in, and how I composed and exposed the shots, some of these look great, in my opinion, and some are trash because they lack adequate contrast. In this example, the sun was setting, so I positioned myself to have that bright part of the sky behind him, and now we have that highlight for the reds, and we have the dark fence in the background and his jacket for the blues. Then I fine-tuned the exposure to prioritize his skin tone while still maintaining those deep shadows and high highlights, and we have contrast. Now, this 2-person interview I originally started outside, but the sun was coming out more and more and I was riding the exposure, realizing that everything in the middle of the frame was kind of turning into just mid-tone land. So we went inside the van. And now in the false color, you can see that we have proper exposure on their skin tones, but also very deep shadows with all of those blues in the back of the van. And as a little cherry on top, you have extra highlights on the left and right side of frame with the windows. So let's put these principles into practice with a quick little test in my dining room. I'll set Rachel up on this light colored wall, and we did properly expose her with a 300D. All of these tests are lit with the same 300D. but it gets immediately better when we rotate the camera to reveal the window, creating a natural highlight. But now we have this wall, which is basically one luminance value. So let's add some darker furniture to push down towards the shadows. So now there is contrast in the shot overall, but I would like more contrast on the right side of frame where everything is pretty dark. So let's add a 120D hitting the floor to kind of fake a window light from that other room. And now we have light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light. Contrast galore spread all over the frame. Before and after. So far, all of this contrast talk has been about light and dark areas of a frame. But to level up from that, we could also add color contrast to a frame as well. I think that's a topic for another video though. I'm gonna call it here for today. Subscribe if you're interested. Below I have a newsletter, Instagram, affiliate links, all the things. See you later.